The old church on the outskirts of town had always been a place both of fascination and of dread. Its bell tower, swaying slightly as if bent under the weight of the secrets it kept, cut against the cold December sky. They said the priest disappeared on Christmas Eve long ago, and since then, nothing but strange things happened. A group of friends who wanted to experience an adrenaline rush and get away from holiday stress decided to put the stories to a test, but what they discovered was much more frightful than they could ever imagine. It was 2 nights before Christmas when Sarah, Jake, Molly, and Ben were gathered around the fireplace in Sarah's living room. The snow outside painted the world in silence, but their laughter and chatting filled the air. Friends since college, they have reunited for the holidays after carrying their individual burdens throughout the year. Sarah carrying the weight of a separated family, Jake that job loss, Molly that hollow feeling over a recent breakup, Ben that guilt for missing last Christmas with his father. "We should do something memorable," Jake said with a mischievous grin as he leaned forward. "How about the old church? You know, the one everyone says is haunted?" Molly shuddered. "Are you serious? That place gives me the creeps." "Come on," Jake wheedled. "It's just a building. Let's prove those ghost stories are just that, stories." Ben was indecisive. "And what about the legends? People say the priest is nowhere to be found and vanished on Christmas Eve, never to return. What if we mess something?" Sarah, desperate to change the subject from the heartache she felt herself, half-heartedly smiled. "It will be fun, an adventure, and just think of the story for afterwards." The group finally decided, and by midnight they were driving through snow-lined streets towards the other end of town. The church stood in eerie silence, surrounded by a forgotten graveyard. The snow muted their footsteps as they approached. The bell tower, dark and foreboding, cast long shadows under the moonlight. A rusted gate creaked as Sarah pushed it open. "I don't like this," Molly whispered, clutching Ben's arm. Jake laughed nervously. "Relax, it's just an old church." Inside, the air was heavy with cold and decay. Broken pews lined the nave, and the faint smell of burnt candles lingered. A tattered Bible lay open on the altar, its pages yellowed and brittle. As they explored, Sarah noticed something odd: faint footprints in the snow-covered floor, leading deeper into the church. "Someone's been here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben frowned. "Maybe we should leave." But Jake's curiosity overcame him. "Let's go see the bell tower," he said, already climbing the creaking staircase. At the top of the bell tower, they found a great iron bell, tarnished and silent for years. Molly pointed to something scratched into the wall. "Forgive me, Father. That's unnerving," she said, stepping back. Suddenly, the bell tolled. The sound was deafening, reverberating through the church in their very bones. But there was no one there to ring it. "We need to go," Ben said, panic rising in his voice. Before they could make a move, a freezing gale blew through the tower and extinguished their flashlights. They heard a murmur in the dark, low, mournful, as if it emanated from everywhere around them. Sarah felt a touch on her shoulder. When she looked round, there was nobody. "Run, run," shouted Jake, and they took to the stairs, thudding and stumbling their way down, their hearts thundering in their ears. Back in the nave, they regrouped, shaken but unhurt. "What the hell was that?" Molly demanded. "The priest," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "The story said he vanished on Christmas Eve, after something terrible happened." Ben picked up the tattered Bible on the altar. Inside, a page was marked with a cryptic message: "Confess, and you shall find peace." Beneath it was a date, December 24, 1953. "What does it mean?" Jake asked. The answer came in the form of movement. Shadows flickered at the edges of the room, and the temperature dropped further. The whispering returned, louder this time. "We need to leave," Ben said, but the doors wouldn't budge. They were trapped. A ghostly figure of man wearing priestly robes appeared right in front of the altar. His face was whitened, eyes sunken deep, and his being portrayed anger and sorrowful appearance. He raised one of his hands, and without warning, the group was thudded to the ground due to an unseen force. "What do you want?" cried Sarah. The priest pointed outside to the graveyard. They understood. The answer lay there. Braving the bitter cold, they followed the priest's shadow to a forgotten grave. The headstone was cracked, but the name was legible. Father Michael Turner. Below it, another name, Eleanor Jacobs. "Who is she?" Molly asked. Sarah recalled the town's lore. Eleanor was a parishioner. She disappeared about the same time as the priest, they said. They said she was pregnant. The whispers grew louder, forming words, "Confess the truth." Ben kneeled on the frozen earth and rubbed away snowflakes blanketing it. Under all the muck was a rusted box, and inside these love letters penned between Father Michael and Eleanor. On this last letter, this plan revealed them to slip away for Christmas Eve with each other, but someone in the vicinity knew their plans. In this last paragraph, he penned, "Forgive us. We are sinners." Suddenly, the ghost of the priest appeared again, tears streaming down his translucent face. He pointed to the church, and they understood he wanted them to find Eleanor. In the basement of the church, they discovered a hidden chamber. Inside was a skeleton, clutching a rosary. Molly gasped, "It's Eleanor." The room grew unbearably cold, and the priest's ghost appeared once more. He knelt before the skeleton, a look of profound sorrow on his face. The ghost of Eleanor appeared beside him, her expression one of forgiveness. The two spirits embraced, and the room filled with a warm golden light. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the church seemed to breathe again. The sun had just begun to break the darkness when the group of them stood outside the church. The first rays of the sun touched the bell tower. The ghosts were gone, their story finally told, their souls at peace. Sarah looked at her friends. "We came here looking for a thrill, but we found something much deeper and scarier," Jake added with a nervous laugh. They left the church, changed forever by what they had experienced. And as they drove away, the bell tolled once more, a final farewell to the spirits who had haunted Christmas for so long. Before moving on to the next story, if this is your first time, make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for the next stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. It was the cabin alone against the background of a heavy, relentless snowfall. The woods nestled deep in the woods. It was a family retreat where the Thompsons spend their Christmas every year. Inside, the warmth of the crackling fire painted the wooden walls in hues of gold, while the faint scent of pine needles and freshly baked cookies filled the air. Emily Thompson was dancing around the tree, giggling as she admired the twinkling lights. Her parents, Laura and Daniel, were sitting on the couch, exchanging nostalgic smiles. "I love it here," Laura said, leaning her head on Daniel's shoulder. "No phones, no interruptions, just us. And this blizzard makes it even cozier," Daniel replied, sipping his hot cocoa. The wind was howling outside, but inside it was a cocoon of holiday cheer. They were unaware that the serenity of their evening would be shattered. It was just past midnight when the knock came. 3 sharp, deliberate raps against the thick wooden door. The sound was jarring amidst the storm's muffled roars. Laura froze, the warmth in her chest replaced by a prickle of unease. Who could that be, out here, in this weather? Daniel stood, glancing toward the door. Maybe someone's car broke down. Could be a hiker caught in the storm. Emily peeked from behind the couch, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Santa," she whispered hopefully. "Stay here," Daniel said firmly, fetching a flashlight from the mantel. Just as he came to the door, the knock again echoed through, this time louder. He unfastened it, holding it just wide enough, and there stood a figure swaddled in a tattered coat and snow-laden beard against his worn face. There was desperation, something deeper in those eyes. "Please," he croaked. "Please, help me. Storm, lost." Laura joined Daniel at the door, her maternal instinct overriding her hesitation. "Come in. You'll freeze out there." The man introduced himself as Sam and claimed he'd been hiking when the blizzard caught him off guard. His clothes were damp, his hands trembling as he clutched the mug of cocoa Laura offered. "You're lucky you found us," Daniel said, though his voice carried a hint of wariness. "We're pretty far from any trail." Sam's lips curved into a faint smile. Lucky indeed. His eyes scanned the room, lingering a second too long on Emily, who had crept closer to the fire, her rabbit clutched tightly. Laura noticed. "Emily, honey, time for bed," she said gently. "Say goodnight." Emily pouted but obeyed, giving Sam a wary glance before disappearing up the stairs. Laura's heart ached as she watched her daughter. Something about Sam felt off. His movements were too deliberate, his smile too practiced. With hours melting, blizzard sealed the cabin in its own blanket of white. The presence of Sam in this cabin became more a matter of intrusion than a coincidence. He kept asking pertinent questions about the family. "Do you often stay here? Anyone else aware you are here? No close neighbors around, would you say?" Daniel found his uneasiness at work, but he strived to remain polite as possible. "We have always come here for Christmas. It's a family tradition." Sam's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. A lovely tradition. Laura noticed how his hand lingered near the knife he'd used to butter bread. Her pulse quickened, and she excused herself to check on Emily. Upstairs, she found her daughter sound asleep, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Laura sat on the edge of the bed, whispering a silent prayer for the storm to pass. Downstairs, Daniel was attuned to a different pitch from the one outside. He sensed an even worse potential danger, for the interior storm raged. Between them, an oppressive tension building up. "Thanks for the hospitality," Sam said, standing up now. "But I'd better go. I shouldn't want to stay all night, overstay it, or whatever." But Laura arrived in time to have caught that. "You aren't going out into the rain, are you?" Laura said firmly. Sam looked at her, tilting his head to one side. "You are very kind, perhaps too kind." The words hung in the air like a warning. Before anyone could respond, Sam reached for the fire poker and began clutching it like a weapon. "Sit down," he growled, his affable mask breaking into something savage. "Now." Daniel instinctively stepped forward, standing in front of Laura with his hands raised. "Easy now. This doesn't have to get that ugly." Sam's eyes seemed to be gleaming with an ice-cold intensity. "Do you know how long I have been out there, watching people like you, comfortable, happy, ignorant of the cruelty of this world?" Laura gasped for air. "We can help you, whatever you want. I need justice," Sam spat, "or every one of us forgotten like this." Upstairs, little Emily called, her small voice rising clear as day. "Mommy." Sam's head shot toward the staircase. "Oh, the little one," he said in a twisted smile. Laura's fear transformed into resolve. "You'll stay away from her," she said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her. Sam laughed. "Or what? You'll stop me?" In a flash of courage, Daniel tackled Sam, and the fire poker clattered to the floor. The two men wrestled around, overturning furniture. Laura snatched the poker and swung it with all her might, hitting Sam's shoulder. He let out a roar in pain, but was able to push Daniel off. "Run," Daniel shouted to Laura. Grabbing Emily from her room, Laura bolted to the attic, barring the door behind them. Emily was crying, clutching her rabbit. "Mommy, I'm scared." "It's okay, baby," Laura whispered, her voice shaking. "We're going to be okay." Below, Daniel managed to grab a heavy log from the firewood pile, using it to defend himself. Sam was relentless, his fury fueled by years of bitterness and despair. Upstairs, Laura frantically rummaged through anything that could be of help. She found an old flare gun stuck in a storage box. Sam's footsteps were audible on the stairs. He was coming for them. "Stay behind me," Laura told Emily, clutching the flare gun tight. The attic door opened wide, and Sam entered with his face all red with rage. "No more hiding," he growled. Laura shot the flare gun. The bright light exploded in the confined space, blinding Sam and setting the room ablaze. He stumbled back, screaming. Daniel appeared moments later, battered but alive. He grabbed Emily. It was a quiet little town in the 1972 when the series of brutal Christmas murders shook it. What made it worse was the fact that the killer, dressed as Santa Claus, was spreading terror rather than cheer. A tradition which started to make a Christmas merry and bright for everyone, quickly turned into the most horrific spree of violence, as no one knew who'd be next, and it lingered long after the last snowflake had fallen. In December 1974, the streets of Greystone shone with fresh fallen snow. Multitudes of houses were dripping in colorful lights, with a pine fragrance wafting through the air. To many, Christmas at Greystone was a festive period, a time of fellowship and joy. But it wasn't for Sarah, an overworked single mother who pumped coffee at the local diner. Sarah had lost her husband the previous winter in a tragic car accident. Now, Christmas was a painful reminder of what was missing in her life. She worked double shifts to provide for her 8-year-old daughter, Emily, who was the only light in her world. Emily's excitement about the holiday season was contagious, and Sarah did her best to keep their Christmas spirit alive. That year, the town introduced something new into the Christmas festival: Santa Claus, who would come and visit different neighborhoods in the town and give the kids small presents. This idea was driven by the charity group that existed locally, and this man, known as Santa Joe, gained popularity quite fast because he was cheerful, kind, and always seemed to be flashing a glint of sparkle in his eye. No one ever really knew Santa Joe. It was on December 14th that the first tragedy occurred. Anna was a teenager who babysat for several families in the neighborhood. She failed to return home after watching the Henderson children. Her parents assumed she must have stayed late to help them decorate their tree, but as morning came and there was still no sign of her, panic set in. Her body was discovered in the woods just beyond town, her red scarf soaked in blood and tightly knotted around her neck. The town's festive atmosphere turned cold as whispers of the murder spread. Who could have done such a thing? Greystone was the kind of place where people rarely locked their doors, let alone worried about a killer among them. Sarah grew increasingly anxious. She kept Emily closer at night and started walking her to and from school. The fear of the unknown loomed over everyone. And yet, Santa Joe continued his rounds, delivering presents and spreading cheer. For many children, he was a source of comfort amidst the growing unease. Tragedy struck once again in 2 days' time. This time it was the owner of the town's hardware store, Mr. Harper. His body was found behind his shop. The throat had been cut and his body mutilated. There were whispers that injuries were intentional, almost ritualistic. Relations started to link the killings with the holiday season since both victims wore red. The police were baffled. Sheriff Miller, a stoic man who had served Greystone for over 2 decades, admitted that he had never seen anything like this. "It's not random," he told his deputies. "This killer is trying to send a message." But what message? Despite the fear, the Christmas festival continued. It was tradition, after all, and the town needed something to hold on to. Sarah reluctantly allowed Emily to attend the festival's annual tree lighting ceremony, where Santa Joe handed out candy canes. Emily was thrilled, running up to Santa and whispering her Christmas wish into his ear. Sarah watched from afar, feeling a shiver stir within her chest. Santa Joe's smile lingers too long, his eyes locking onto Emily as she skipped back to her mother. "Mom," Santa said, "he's going to bring me a surprise," Emily said, chattering. Sarah faked a smile but could not dispel the nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. It was a bitterly cold night on December 20th. Snow covered the streets, silencing everything. Sarah was putting Emily into bed when she heard faint jingling outside. She looked through the curtains and saw a figure in a red suit standing at the end of the driveway. Her breath caught in her throat. "Santa Joe," she whispered. Emily shot up from bed. "Is he here? Did he bring my surprise?" "Stay here," Sarah commanded, her voice quivering. Grabbing the baseball bat she kept by the door, she crept outside. The figure was nowhere in sight, but footprints in the snow led around the house. Her heart thumped in her chest as she followed them into the backyard, where she found a small package wrapped in red paper. Inside was a bloodied scarf. Terrified, Sarah called the sheriff. By the time he arrived, the footprints had been obscured by falling snow. Sheriff Miller took the package, but offered little comfort. "We'll look into it," he said, though his weary eyes betrayed his doubt. That night, Sarah hardly slept. Every creak of the house sent her nerves up in a knot. She stayed by Emily's bed, clutching the bat, her mind racing with questions. Was the killer taunting her? Was Emily in danger? On Christmas Eve, the town gathered for a final celebration. Sarah didn't want to go, but knew Emily had been looking forward to it. She kept a watchful eye on her daughter, who was eager to see Santa Joe one last time. As the evening wore on, Sarah noticed something was odd. Santa Joe seemed to be distracted, his otherwise jolly demeanor faltering. When Emily approached him, he hesitated and then handed her a candy cane. Sarah's discomfort turned to alarm when she looked at his gloved hand, the dark stain seeping through the white fabric. She could feel her heart beating fast. Could it be blood? Unable to contain her suspicion, Sarah trailed Santa Joe as he made a quick exit from the festival. He disappeared into an alley, taking off his beard and hat. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized who he was. Robert, a drifter who had been assisting in setting up the festival. She recalled how he'd lingers too long by Emily at the diner, and how his eyes always seemed to be watching her. Sarah ran to the sheriff's office, but upon returning to the alley, Robert was nowhere to be found. "We will find him," Sheriff Miller promised her, but Sarah was not willing to bet on it. That evening, she locked the doors and windows and kept Emily close to her. Midnight had nearly passed when the jingling sound came again. Sarah gripped the bat, her pulse pounding in her ears. Glass crashed to pieces in the hallway. She screamed for Emily to seek cover as a figure of red entered the living room. It was Robert, his face distorted with madness. "You ruined everything," he sneered as he advanced toward Sarah. With all the might, Sarah swung at him, hitting him at the shoulder. He did stumble but didn't fall. The cries of Emily from the closet gave a new momentum to Sarah's determination. She swung and swung until he finally fell onto the floor. At the arrival of the sheriff, Sarah clutched Emily with herself, shivering at every movement. Robert's body was pulled out of the house and the nightmare finally came to an end. The murders stopped, but the scars remained. Greystone never looked at Santa Claus the same way again. For Sarah, Christmas became a time of quiet reflection, a reminder of the strength she found in the face of terror. Emily grew up with a deep appreciation for her mother's courage, and though they never spoke of that night, the memory lingered like a shadow, a chilling reminder that even the most beloved symbols can hide unspeakable horrors.